Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to what I guess is going to be our first of I'm thinking many spoiler casts. Although we're going to do this a bit differently here, where we're going to have basically two sections or two videos going over Final Fantasy VII Rebirth from myself and MVG here, who's joining me. Thank you, MVG.
Hello, good to be here.
And we're going to do the first section, which should be this video you're watching now, as like light spoilers, nothing really getting into the nuts and bolts of the story, and certainly not the ending or any of that. More or less our general thoughts, and you'll hear some things about different regions and stuff. Like in terms of that, it would technically be light spoilers. But if you want to hear all about our thoughts on the ending and some of the events leading up to it and what we think could happen in the next game, you'll want to follow up with the heavy spoiler marked Final Fantasy VII Rebirth discussion. But I have completed it. MVG has also completed it. In fact, I think out of like everyone, it's just us two. MVG was waiting for me for a little while to get it done. And I'll admit, I did spend more time in the game than I was expecting, MVG.
So, John, I beat it in 39.6 hours. I checked my save file. How many hours did you take to beat it? I know you did a lot more than I did.
To beat it, I think beating it was like 67 or 68 hours.
Yeah, I think that's kind of normal for most people to kind of beat it in around between 60 and 80 hours.
Yeah, and then I did some other stuff now, and I'm just shy of the 80-hour mark. I'm like 79 hours and 40-something minutes. So, but I will say, I think I am to a point now where I'm just good. Like, I was looking at the trophy list and some of the stuff, and I'm like, I don't know if I'm going to be going through that right now. Maybe I'll come back to it eventually, especially when we do the build up to the next game, a couple of years from now. But I feel like I'm content with what I've experienced and how much time I've gotten out of this game. So yeah. I'm prepared now to move on. But going into it, I'll admit I wasn't expecting it to be this much time after playing Remake, which Remake was like a 25 to 30 hour game for most people to play through it.
Yeah, I think going back and thinking about it, I haven't checked my save file, but I think I beat it in about 25 hours. And, I did a lot of stuff in that game. I didn't obviously do everything, but I think it was about a 25-hour experience. And I think, a lot of that was in the mid game, about 10, 15 hours of that was probably in the mid game. But yeah, this game is obviously a lot bigger than Remake.
Yeah, even like Final Fantasy 16, that was I think like a 45-hour experience for me to play through it. So this is the most time I've put into a Final Fantasy in actually quite a while now that I'm thinking about it. So it at least kept me engaged for the most part throughout. But going back to the beginning, what I was expecting versus what I ended up getting, I will say it was maybe a little different, and some of that came down to the structure of the game with the different areas, because they keep describing it as an open world game, and it's like open zone, I think is what we came to the determination of when we were discussing it on the podcast.
Yeah.
And each one kind of has its own chocobo sort of, and there are different events that are specific to each region. So it doesn't feel like any one area spills over to another. So they do kind of feel like separate areas in general, not all one connected world.
Yeah, I mean, essentially you have like 6 zones in the game, right? You got like the grasslands, and you got Junon and Costa del Sol and Gongaga and Nibble. I think there's a couple of others, but yeah, I mean, you kind of it's a little unfair to call it a zone, because when we think of a zone, we think of a small piece of landmass where you can kind of, it's more of a compressed down open world in some way, but it's bigger than an open zone, but it's obviously not open world in the traditional sense where you can just go anywhere you want. There's definitely parts of the game and the zones that you go in. Yeah, when you're kind of hitting your zone, you can pretty much do anything you want, as given all the side quests that are available and all the things you can do. But one of the things I noticed, John, is once you kind of get locked into the main story, or if you hit the the main town in the zone, it kind of locks you down to you can't leave. You can't leave easily in my experience. So there's definitely something to be said about the use of the word open world in this game, because think about open world, that kind of you think about games like Red Dead Redemption or Tears of the Kingdom, Breath of the Wild. Oblivion, something like that, or Skyrim. This is not that, in my opinion. I think there's definitely some limitations on what you can do when you hit like a new zone in the game.
Yeah, it does have some linearity to it compared to those ones where it locks you in a series of events almost, and even at certain points in the game, I noticed that there were times where like just fast travel was disabled for prolonged periods of time, to where I was like,
Yeah,
oh, okay, well this is what I'm doing for a few hours now, okay, as they were trying to kind of pull you through those story elements. But I do feel like now that I think about it, looking at each and every character as we went through, each one did kind of get some time for their backstory. And while some of those were kind of fast tracked at the end, especially there was a certain part in the game where each character sort of had a bit of a reflection period looking
yeah,
at themselves. I kind of feel like those were that sort of fast tracked a few of the characters. Some of them got more time than I was expecting. Kate Sith was
yeah.
much more of a focus than I thought they would be in the
Hmm.
game,
Yeah.
which I do like. I do like that while they are doing the reimagining thing, as we of course know from Remake at the end of that, they're also kind of going to the characters and revamping them a bit with their place in the storyline.
Yeah, the reveal of Kate Sith was actually one of the highlights for me in the game. I thought that was really cool. I also even liked the story with Barrett and his friend. I thought they kind of did that really well, kind of in the middle of the game. That was a lot more emotional than why than I thought it would be, and that was definitely a highlight for me. I did enjoy that, but yeah, I do like the backstories they have for all the characters. I think they really did a good job on that aspect of the game for sure.
So the gameplay wise, the combat in the game, the synergy abilities, the materia system, like the materia for the most part, very similar to Remake. I feel like when I was like, unfortunately, materia for me didn't feel as pivotal
No,
personally as I was
no,
kind of thinking. I mean, I thought they might do something a little different with it, but they kept it relatively the same. You put them into your weapons or your armor, or your accessories, and of course you can have more and more slots as you go. And they did have the transmutation stuff where you basically they wanted to put crafting in, and that's fine because they have
yeah.
resources around the open world. And I think I got to level 15 or so with that. But even that part, I just found accessories that I never really got off of like in the second half of the game because it had all my material lined up nicely. And I wasn't even willing to sacrifice maybe 10 stat points or something for that. Like everything was just lined up for me anyway. And eventually I just didn't customize my materia as much until post game when I was just fighting some very difficult enemies. But for like the
Yeah.
story and the main pathway, it was like, all right, do I have fire? Do I have blizzard? Do I have lightning? And then do I have like a haste or cure or something? And I was like, I'm good. That's it. I'm fine. So I that part unfortunately felt kind of like an afterthought, which is odd because in just the original Final Fantasy 7, materia was such a crucial part of that game.
Let's call it what it is, John. They kind of nerfed materia in this game a bit.
Mm.
They made it less essential to forging your way through the game and kind of beating some of the bigger bosses. I I have to go back and check the original FF7 because it's been a long time, but I feel like they nerfed a lot of the materia in the game. Like I don't feel like the HP up and the MP up were anywhere near as potent in this as they were in the original. Someone may correct me in the chat or in the comments, I should say, but I don't know. Like I just for me, every time I found a new materia, I didn't really care, what it did. I just kind of put it into an empty slot that someone had and kind of ran with it. And I don't want to say all the time it got the job done, but 95% of the time it was fine. So I do feel like they didn't have that reliance on the materia stuff as much as they did previously in the original game.
I
For
also
better or
didn't.
for worse.
So when you max level like a fire or a thunder, you get like Faraga or Thundaga or something. I really didn't use those much because they take up two of your ATB bars. Like it
Yeah.
uses both of them, and I'm thinking
Yeah.
that's why would I it'd be better to save one and use like the tier below that like Thunder and then save the other just in case I need it for an ability or to cure or something like
Yeah.
that. I unfortunately I kind of shied away from using those really cool super powerful magic attacks. So that was an interesting decision on their part for that because I think Curaga is still just one bar. So that like cures you almost completely at that point.
Yeah.
So I the combat, the synergy stuff was I thought pretty cool. Like I would hold down block and it would come up with all these different
Yeah.
things you can do with your characters. And the counter one was pretty good. When you figured that out and you could hit back really hard for any of the enemies that punch you and really hit their stagger gauge,
Yeah.
that to me was for me anyway, was a big thing I relied on, especially with some of the
Same.
big bosses.
Yeah, same. I used that a lot, and I kind of kept forgetting, especially early on, that I had that ability. Because again, I'm kind of hardwired to think about the original. And yeah, eventually I kind of started using it more and more, and became an integral part of my combat style. Pretty much after about 7 or 8 hours in, I was using it a lot in the game.
I have to ask you, MG, what was your main party that you relied on? There are certain parts in the game where they're like, okay, this is going to be your party no matter what. But when they
Yeah.
showed up and they said, "Who do you want in there?" Three. Who were your main
So
guys?
I was rolling mainly with Cloud, Tifa, and Aerith,
Okay.
but I think I did dabble with Kate Sith and Red 13 as well. But I really want to say that I did really appreciate the sections of the game where you have to control another character
Mm.
that you may not necessarily wanted to control. It kind of just forced you to do it. It wasn't actually something that I felt like was a negative thing. I actually quite enjoyed it because it kind of puts you in the shoes of a character that you may not necessarily have in your party, but you still get to kind of mess around with from a combat aspect and a story aspect as well. So I thought that was cool. But I was doing Tifa and Aerith for the most part. What did you have?
Okay. I had Cloud, Barrett, and Tifa. That was the
Yeah.
main trio for me.
Hmm.
But you know what I noticed? Because they did that, they would say, okay, now you're going to use Aerith, Kate, like a random assortment of characters sometimes. And what I noticed is each character genuinely felt different from each one. Like they all felt different, which I really appreciate because they did a lot with like your triangle attack was generally your most unique ability for each character, but even like their regular attacks were just like obviously Barrett being ranged, but Aerith would either do shoot magic or just hit them with her staff.
Yeah.
Yuffie had all kinds of abilities depending on if your blade was thrown out there and hovering around, you would do more magic or melee. And it did feel like okay, I kind of understand maybe a certain boss, how they are trying to get you to approach it and what your party should be. So you can brute force your way through maybe an enemy, a big boss that's trying hard to get you to rely on magic and then healing with Aerith. You could technically try to brute force it with a Red 13, a Cloud, and a Barrett. It's just not going to be as easy necessarily. So
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
I did like that the characters did feel like they each had a purpose in
Mhm.
battle. And I think some of the enemy types they would throw at you really did a good job. The only thing I would have liked is this might have just been broken, and they're like, we can't do this. Being able to change out your characters on the fly in the middle of battle could have been kind of cool, like even like a tagging animation or something. And maybe they're like, look, you're gonna come in with full HP. What are we gonna do with that? Like you're just
Yeah.
gonna,
Like, I mean, you see that just kind of hanging around on the
Mhm.
sidelines, kind of, and they're doing some like fake attacks and stuff as well.
Yeah.
So it's like, why can't I just target you and put you in my party real quick?
You
I
can
felt
you
like
can do
that would have
like
been cool.
backline support and they'll throw something at you or like they'll throw a little attack. I mean, like if you could just go, okay, I'm changing out because you could do that in Final Fantasy X. That was turn based, I get it, so it was a bit
Yeah.
easier to manage. But the idea of being able to just like have them flip backwards out and then here comes like Tifa to take Barrett's place or whoever, I don't know, that could lead to some pretty cool combinations and stuff on the fly. That's
Mhm.
maybe that's what they got planned for the next one. But I feel like some of the enemies would have to become significantly more powerful
Yeah.
if we're gonna do that.
For sure.
So
Yeah,
maybe that.
they'd have to ramp up the difficulty for that because I mean, like you could make it almost overpowered where, if you had control of pretty much everyone, you could, I mean, it sounds like you could beat every single encounter, really. So, but yeah, hopefully they can offer something like that in the next game because I do kind of feel like looking back again, there are moments in the game where you control other characters and you have no choice. I think ultimately you end up, and maybe I'm wrong, John, but I think you end up playing with everyone. Like eventually in the game,
You do.
everyone will be in the party at some point. But it would be cool to to have the ability to kind of swap players in and out during combat. I think that would be fun.
Okay, MVG, let's get real for a minute here. Without any major spoilers, nothing like that, just a general overview.
Mhm.
How did you feel about the length of the game and sort of the path that they took throughout the story?
So for me, this is kind of the weakest part of Rebirth. That and again, I want to be clear that I'm someone that obviously played the original. People that are coming into Final Fantasy and have played Rebirth without the original, without experiencing the original, probably have really enjoyed the game, and that's probably one of the reasons why it's got such a high rating on Metacritic. I think it's at a 92 right now. For me, I felt like the game was good. Overall, it had me compelled. I played it from start to finish. I didn't do much of the side quests, as mentioned. Look, it's an amazing story, and I feel like where it kind of fell apart for me a little bit is that the original was such a classic. They did all sorts of unique and crazy things. It was kind of ballsy. They just threw all this stuff into the game. I don't want to kind of talk about spoilers yet, but you know what I'm talking about. There was just so much in the original that made it such a masterpiece in so many ways. With this one, the story is very interesting, and it's what had me compelled from start to finish. But this is where I'm going to, talk about the useless padding that was in the
Yeah,
game. There are a
padding
lot of
to bear.
issues. There's a lot of issues with the pacing of this game, and I feel like they didn't really need to throw in so much to make this game what it is. Like I felt like they threw in all these mini games, they threw in all these side quests, they threw in so much stuff, and they didn't really need to. Especially if you have a 40 hour single play campaign, right there, that's enough. I mean, that's enough to sell a $70 game by itself, right? Um, so I didn't feel like they really needed to spend so much time padding the game out. And in turn, some of the pacing really kind of got lost on me, where, I kind of had to really just kind of force my way through sections of the game to get to the next town or to get to the next main quest line. So look, I felt like overall it's a very, very good game, but there was just the padding for me was really kind of what did it for me. That even kind of skipping a lot of the side quests and stuff, there's still a lot of padding in that game that you really have no choice, but you have to kind of play through to get to the end.
Talking about like the video game trope of there just being an inconvenience for the sake of being an inconvenience. Like, so in the demo, I mean, people have played it. It's not really spoiler territory there because it's early on in the game and it was just out there before the game came out. But like, you have to move this machine around to suck up materia, that kind of
Oh
thing. And it's
yeah,
like, that's weird. Why do I
yeah,
have to do that? And I guess they're playing into the idea of you got to clean up the materia because that just happens in the world. And then you go to another one and the court's not quite long enough. So you got to figure out, and it's like, okay, it's kind of like that, but for some reason they even go further in the game to where it does feel like at times you're like, oh, this doesn't feel natural necessarily. It feels like they threw it up there because they wanted a 40+ hour game as opposed to just they could have made a really like tight knit 30-hour game out of this, I feel like.
hmm
And
yeah.
I think that's a correct assessment to where there's probably an additional 10 hours in the story that could have been eliminated in terms of like just what you're playing. And I feel like the open zone aspect will go with there is a lot there to where it would double that easily. So instead of it being like an 80-hour game that I'm into so far, it'd be like a 60 to 70-hour game with the open zone stuff thrown in. And I think that's a better path to go personally. So I do hear people. I do hear you with that MVG with the padding kind of thrown in there.
The one that got me the most was the Costa del Sol, where you got to
Oh,
take the cactua pictures.
you didn't like that. You didn't like that.
No, that one was an absolute snooze. I will say, John, that was probably one of the points in the game where I was like, I may just quit this game. I don't know if I
So
want to continue, but I
get
did it. I did it, of
I
course.
get what they were going with there. The thing that I do appreciate about Rebirth is they have no problem just getting absolutely zany and weird with the characters to where you have incredibly serious moments happening,
Yeah,
right? Like Sephiroth burning down the entire village and just murdering people in the streets. And then it's like, oh, you got to go do all these little activities as a couple so that you can get your swimsuits because we don't take real money. We don't take gil. You have to use these tickets. And it's like, I get it. They have those slice of life moments. So it's contrasting. And that is something I had somewhat of an issue with 16 is it was just always dark and brooding. Like
Mhm.
there was never a moment where like you see the characters being silly. And I think there is something to that, so that the serious dark moments feel that much more impactful when you have them out on the beach just hanging out and like doing
Yeah.
photo shoots, like just funny things. There was a Rocket League mode with Red 13 in the game.
Yeah, I
Like
think
why?
I think, like, again, in the original, there's a specific scene that happens, and then, like, I think 30 minutes later, they're, like, snowboarding or something, right?
Yeah.
Like, and look, there's nothing wrong with game flow like that, but I feel like with Rebirth, there's almost too much variety in the game.
Hmm.
Like, it doesn't, I don't know, like, I just felt like they threw so much into this game. Like, I don't want to learn a new mini game every time.
I
I didn't
understand.
I didn't do the card game thing, and I heard good things about the card game, that people really enjoyed it. Um, but that's not something that I was ever interested in, fortunately. And I don't know if this was something that was intended, but I actually never played a single card game and was able to get through the main story. So I think there's that one part where you have to enter a tournament,
Mhm.
and it's a main quest line thing. And I basically just quit early. Like, I started the first match and I quit. And everyone was like disappointed in me that I was a loser or something, but the main story continued on. So I was like, oh, well, that's good. But I think ultimately this game, like, almost has too much in it. Like, there's too
Hmm.
many things going on. And I feel like some of the vision of the game kind of gets a little bit lost, for me. But I do see what they were going with, and look, a lot of people, like I said, did like the card game and did like some of the mini games. For me, some of them hit and some of them didn't, and I didn't, think that they were particularly great.
I did complete the entirety of the Queen's Blood quest line. I did the whole
That's
thing,
it's
played
impressive.
all the matches. And there is a trophy, by the way, for winning that tournament on the vote. um, but there was no trophy for beating the quest line.
Well, there
So
you go.
I don't know. And I, I'm not going to spoil what happens with Queen's Blood. I will say it got a little weird throughout it, but that I was based the whole time I was going through it. I was looking for like some sort of interaction with the main game in terms of in previous Final Fantasies where there's a card game, typically you would get something that would aid a character, whether it's part of an ultimate weapon or like there's a legit reward at the end. And for the most part, you play Queen's Blood to then get more cards for Queen's Blood. That's
Mhm.
kind of it as you go through. So that to me was kind of a disappointing part with it, but I
Yeah.
really liked the game. So
Yeah.
much so that I played all the way through. You don't even have to do it. You don't have to go to all these different areas. You didn't. But I tracked down there were masters of Queen's Blood in different
Mhm.
regions, and I did all of that. And then you get the final boss and stuff, and there are twists and turns based on who the final bosses are, and like I did all of that.
Yeah.
But some people are going to look at that and they're just going to be unsure as to what the point is, other than you just like Queen's Blood. So that was kind of my draw, was to see who the final boss was in the game for it, and it being legitimately fun for me.
Yeah.
So
I hear. What
that's
about
about it.
the last thing I want to talk about, with the main game is, what about the weapon upgrades? I mean, we talked about materia, right? But what about, like, did you feel like every time you got a new weapon upgrade, it felt like it was a significant upgrade? For me, it just didn't really feel like a big enough upgrade that I was expecting.
You mean the weapon
The
upgrade? So like
weapons,
when your
yeah.
weapon levels up,
Hmm.
does it feel like it leveled up?
Yeah.
You know, okay, so there were certain times where you would get an extra slot for your weapon for some sort of passive ability to drop in, and I thought that was great. But when it leveled up and I didn't get that,
Yeah.
I didn't feel like it leveled up. This was a weird weapon progression system. I will admit that, because I feel like they could have done a little bit more with it, because you don't level up often with it. I think the max is like 8 or 9 or something like
I
that.
think it's I
So
think it's 9. I think it's
yeah,
9. Yeah.
it doesn't happen often throughout the game. So I feel like they could have, and then you look at the passive abilities and they're not that significant necessarily. Like it might say you do 5% more damage with base attacks, or you might get 200 HP. Uh, they could have, I think, gone a little crazy. The thing I never felt in this game was overpowered necessarily. And my
Yeah,
characters are
yeah,
max level. Like I max leveled them the whole deal. I never
yep.
felt overpowered. And there are other Final Fantasies where the whole idea of the game is to eventually become stupid powerful.
Hmm.
Like 10 is probably the worst with that. Like 10, you can do some wild damage. You
Yeah.
can break the damage limit in Rebirth, but I've never felt, other than certain summons that go crazy with their final attack, that I would really hit that much higher than 10,000 damage. Like it just
Yeah.
it never occurred to me necessarily.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, the combat, there was nothing inherently bad about the combat in the game. It just, for me, I don't know. It almost felt a little insignificant when you leveled up and you leveled up your weapons in the game. It was almost like no matter what you did or what weapon you had or what level it was, you were always still going to be at the same point. But with that said, I ended up beating the game, and I think I was level 52 when I beat it, so I didn't max out.
That's about
I
right.
think the cap 70, right? I think
It is
is it
70.
70?
Yep.
Yeah. And I felt, and I played on normal. I wasn't playing on hard mode or anything like that. I felt, I don't want to say I felt overpowered because I didn't. There was definitely some battles that I ended up struggling on, and I lost a couple of battles as well. But for the most part, I was pretty much in control from start to finish in that game. Kind of just cruising through it, getting some
I will,
upgrades, adding materia. It seemed
yeah,
like
I will tell
everything was just
people
working.
at the end of the game when you beat it, there is a way to go from like 52 or 53 to 68, 69, 70 in like 30 minutes. I'll throw it out there for people who want to do that. It's very easy. There's a quest. Again, you can look it up if you would like to go that route, and it doesn't take long at all. So jump it's pretty ridiculous actually. And I don't know if it'll ever be patched out, but it is available for people if they just want to fast track that. Because some of those levels at the end do become a bit more grindy. You basically have to do hard mode to max level it. But the other thing I will point out, MVG, is I mentioned I did 100% every area, funny enough, except for grasslands that I was working
Mhm.
on before we started recording here.
Yeah.
And there was one thing that I actually got a kick out of, and I do recommend people who are watching this to go through these quest lines, and that's for the proto relics. There's like 4 of them in each region, and
Mhm.
it comes together and makes a certain item. And at the end of it, you end up going off to a certain area. There's like a certain enemy there, and it was kind of an interesting ending to it and the characters that were involved. So I
Yeah.
will at least bring that up. I did like some of the side quests. Some of the side quests definitely added some extra story to the game as well. So if you're in regions and you're looking at it, there is more than just trying to level up from it, as you'll get items, but really you'll get different context and pieces of the story even, and more about each character. Like there are certain side quests that are all about like Tifa, for example, or you'll get one for Red 13 and you'll see more of their personality. So
Yeah.
I do think some of those side quests are interesting and it's worth going back to.
I did a couple of them, and I also did some of the simulator ones to pick up some of the summons as
Mhm.
well, just to kind of mess with those. But I don't know, John. Like for me, I didn't feel like I missed out on anything kind of compelling. I have heard that there are some really good side quests in the game, and people should play some of them. But in my playthrough, I didn't feel like I missed anything really that compelling.
Well, you also, they had the chocobos too throughout, and I got all the
Yeah.
chocobos as well. I did
Well,
all
I
that.
told you, like there were some zones I went to, or some worlds I went to that I didn't even get the chocobo, So uh like sometimes I got it, sometimes I didn't. And it wasn't really an issue. Sometimes I was just walking, sometimes you have different vehicle depending on where you are, but it wasn't really a big thing that I didn't have one when I needed it.
Well, let me ask you this, MVG, as we finish up here. Which area was your favorite and which one was your least favorite? Like the areas that you went to throughout the
Um
world.
I actually liked the gold saucer stuff, what they
Yep.
did with that. I thought that was really cool. Um, I think for me, that was probably my favorite. I did like Junon as well. That was well done. We got a glimpse of that in the demo.
Mhm.
But obviously in the full game, it's a lot more fleshed out, of course. But if I had to pick, I'd probably say gold saucer. That was a lot of
Yeah.
fun to mess around with.
Gold Gold Saucer, I think, is gonna be a lot of people's favorite one.
Yeah.
Uh, and mine included. My least favorite, though, I thought about this because that was one of the final areas that I've 100%ed was Gungaga, the jungle area where you're
Yeah.
going between. You get the chocobo, and the idea of the chocobo is to jump off of mushrooms that are there.
Oh, that's right. Yeah. Yeah.
It made for the worst navigation to get to each one of the points on the map. I could
Mhm.
not stand it. I think Cosmo Canyon was the other one because the game doesn't deal with elevation the best,
Right.
but Gungaga, it was that. But then you also don't know where the mushroom's sending you, and then there's also like jungle everywhere, so it was really hard to
Yeah.
navigate that one.
That
But
was definitely not my favorite. I agree. I had the
right.
chocobo for that as well, and I remember, bouncing on the mushrooms as well, trying to figure out where I was supposed to be going. Well, it wasn't great for me.
Gold Saucer, though,
Gold
which is
Saucer
good.
was
I
really
like
good.
Gold Saucer a
Yeah.
lot. That was fun.
Yeah.
There were some cool events that happened there. I think they did a really good job with the fine little details of making it feel basically like Las Vegas. I mean, it's basically Vegas, that
Yeah.
they set up, and it was fun. There was a lot to like about that. But I think if we go any further into it, we'll start getting into some spoiler territory. So I feel like we're going to leave our general thoughts here, and we're going to work into the heavy spoiler video. So if anyone would like to see that, it'll also be posted up over on the Spawncast Network, which you can check out down below. And you can also, we're going to post these up now for YouTube members on the different channels, whether it's Game and Talk or here on Spawncast Network. So if you want to member up, you can also do that. And we are going to hop over to that. So thanks everyone for joining us for our general thoughts of Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, and we'll see you over there.